Hi, my name is Scott Harrison, and I'm one of the pastors at Living Hope Community Church in Estevan, Saskatchewan, and I'd like to welcome you to kind of a first for us. This is the first time we've done strictly online teaching where, this isn't part of a seminar or a conference or a Sunday morning service, but we just want to put some teaching online, link it to our website for the purpose of instructing our congregation, but also to make this available to anybody else that can benefit from it. We want to talk to you about eldership. We want to talk to you about church government. Well, what does it take? What's the biblical format for leading a church? And already I have started by using a cultural term instead of a biblical term. And let me tell you what I mean by that. I introduced myself as one of the pastors at Living Hope Community Church. Effective terminology, most of you know exactly what I'm talking about, but really, those aren't biblical terms. If I were to approach this more biblically, I would have said, hi, my name is Scott Harrison. I'm one of the elders at Living Hope Community Church, or I'm part of the eldership team at Living Hope Community Church. That might not seem important to you, but you know what? That's why we're doing this teaching. Another reason that we're doing it online is people either have a passion for this or they don't. Typically, I've done, there have been times when I've taught this on a Sunday morning or, maybe done a 3 or 4 part series on Sunday mornings. And some people just find it fascinating, but a lot of people just find it very, very boring. They think, I don't know why this is important. I don't know what possible relevance this has to me. And so we want to put this online so that those who have a passion for knowing about church government can get it. Those who are in the need to know, maybe you're part of a church team, you're part of a ministry team in Living Hope or another church, and you really do have to know how things work. And so we want to share this with you. Also at Living Hope right now, we're going through some changes. We're not really changing our structure, but we are expanding it. And we're increasing our eldership team. And so this is a good time. This is a kind of a strategic time for teaching you, the congregation, letting you know exactly what's going on. And so, in the months to come and the years to come, really, there won't be confusion. You'll know what we're doing and what is going on. So what we want to do is to talk to you today about leadership. We want to talk to you today about eldership. Why do we have an eldership? Why do we have the form of church government that we have? Let me just start out by saying that, I recognize that church government, although it's important, it's not all important, not by a long shot. There are so many parts to the kingdom of God, so many really important things in Christian living that, again, church government, just a lot of people's minds, it just never goes in, and they could never see why it would be important to them. But it is an important thing. And I just want to start the whole tone of what we're doing by saying this. I recognize that in leadership in God's kingdom, in leadership in the local church, there really are 2 aspects of it. One is, the first one is the structure. It's what form of government do you take? What are your policies? What are your procedures? Who makes what decisions? How do things work? But the other one is heart. And, Jesus and his disciples frequently discussed kingdom leadership. What is it like? Jesus said, if you're going to lead in my kingdom, you have to be a servant of all. If you're going to be first, then you need to learn to be last. And, he was continually telling them that there's a huge difference between leaders in the world and leaders in his kingdom. The whole, not just style, but the whole heart of the thing is different. It's gentleness, it's compassion, it's strong, but it's loving and considerate and all these other things. And so if a person had to choose between proper structure and proper heart, I'd go with heart every time. I believe that the heart of leadership is more important than the structure, but at the same time, the structure is important. And the fact is, we don't have to make a choice. It's not an either or. We can have good heart and we can have proper structure. And so what I'm going to be focusing on in these 3 sessions has more to do with structure than heart, but I think you'll find that we're touching the heart aspect as well. So we're going to take a look at, first of all, some different forms of contemporary church government. First of all, we're going to start with the New Testament template, and this is what we're striving for. In a few minutes, we'll look at it in more detail than this, but really what we want is we want Christ to lead the church. We don't want that to be a figure of speech. We don't want it to be some spiritual hairy-fairy idea that, oh, yes, Jesus leads us all. No, we want it to be true. We want this to be in fact. And under him, under his authority, he makes elders responsible to lead the church, and then under the care and authority of the elders, the congregation should flourish in spiritual life. Now, 3 points about this. First of all, it is biblical, and we're going to go to great pains. I hope it isn't pain for you, but we're going to go over to great pains in the next number of sessions to show you just how biblical this is. And so that's the way that we want to do it. Secondly, this is culturally universal. This isn't something that just works in Estevan or just works in Canada. It doesn't, this works in Africa. This works in Asia. This works in South America. This worked 100 years ago. It's going to work 100 years from now if Jesus hasn't come back yet. It worked 1,000 years ago. And so this is, you can translate this from culture to culture to culture. And thirdly, it's a guideline that really isn't in a form of legalism. It's not that this is so hard and fast and black and white that, the elder looks like this and he punches his clock in at 8 o'clock in the morning and he leaves at 5. It's not like that. These are guidelines that we're able to implement and learn in and expand on over a period of time. They give us a direction. They give us a good leading format and heart. And so we can do it without legalism. There's lots of room to give and to grow. And even to have different congregations who are both functioning with biblical government, even looking somewhat different, because it's just a guideline. Now we're going to look at some different kinds of contemporary church governments. Some of them are more biblical than others. Some of them are more, you can see that they've been affected by culture, they've been affected by time. But we're going to look at them. And I want to tell you this is not in any way wanting to be critical of any kind of church, any denomination. I thank God for every church on the planet. I think that, the different churches, the different groups, wanting to serve God, wanting to know God better and bring his love to this world. I thank him for all of them. Again, church government is only one aspect of that, but I want to show you the different kinds of contemporary church government in a contrast really to what we're trying to do. And you'll see there's some are starkly different, some have some real similarities. So the first one we're going to talk about is Episcopal, the Episcopal form of church government, and it looks something like this. Now, the Episcopal form of government is practiced by the Roman Catholic Church, Greek Orthodox, Roman Orthodox Church, or the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the Anglican Church. There are a number of different denominations that work this way. They start with a head. In the Catholic Church, of course, that would be the Pope. The Pope works with the School of Cardinals. Under their authority come archbishops. Under the archbishop's authority come bishops. Under the bishop's authority come priests. And under the authority of the priests is the congregation. So that's Episcopal. And it starts with a human head. And that's not intended to be an insulting term. Whether it's the Archbishop of Canterbury or the Pope in Rome, you're going to have sincere, godly men who pray and seek the Lord. And so I'm not suggesting that Christ doesn't influence those. But governmentally speaking, you've got a man or a small group of men at the head, and then the authority flows down. Presbyterian is a second form of church government. And in Presbyterian government, you'll see that looks a lot, if you remember the government that we're looking for, you'll see it's very, very similar. Christ is the head. I don't know a ton about churches that have a Presbyterian form of government, so I'm not sure exactly how that works out practically. They do have elders, and then they have people in the congregation. The difference between a Presbyterian form of church government and the biblical church government that we're aiming at is that in a Presbyterian system, the elders are extra local. That means they're not part of the congregation. If there's a congregation in Estevan that is under a Presbyterian form of government, well, then the elders that will lead it will actually be a committee of people. Maybe one will be in Toronto, one will be in Calgary, one will be in Vancouver. They look over, they give oversight to a number of congregations. And so there is an eldership, but the eldership isn't directly tied to the congregation, or the elders are not directly part of that congregation. Now, I'm going to show you a third form of church government, and before I do that, I'll just explain it to you a little bit. It's a congregational form of government. And in Canada, in the year 2011, where we are right now, we live in a Western democracy, and we are hugely influenced by our thinking on government, how government should go. We're looking, at the time of this taping, we're looking at a federal election probably just in a couple of months. So we're going to be thinking about this a lot. And then Americans and France and Britain, all the Western democracies. When it comes to a nation, man, I am all for democracy. I think it is by far the best form of government on the planet as far as ruling nations go. But in churches, it is diametrically opposed to the kind of government that God has set up. And you'll see that right here. This is how Congregational church government works. You see, oh, that hurt. When that point hit there, that hurt. See, in a Congregational group, it's formed on democracy. And so the congregation runs the church. The congregation rules the church. The congregation will elect a church board, and the church board will administrate the church, and the church board or the congregation and the church board will hire the pastor, and the pastor is then an employee of the congregation being overseen by the board. And I have no doubt that there are churches that function very well this way, but I will tell you from experience, I've been in the ministry over 30 years, I've witnessed a lot of churches that operate with a congregational form of government, and there are a few things that are pretty typical of them. The first one is this, that people without the grace for leadership are leading. What I mean by that is God gives us grace to do what He's called us to do. The grace is the supernatural ability that God gives us to do what He calls us to do. If I'm called to speak to people, He gives me grace to speak to people. And so with His grace, I'm not only communicating ideas and thought and plans to people, but in the power of the Holy Spirit, by the grace of God, I can communicate revelation. I can communicate things that they can't understand with the natural mind, but spiritually they can comprehend. There's grace to do that. God may give another person grace to serve the poor. You can get two people out in a mission field serving the poor. One finds it extremely tough, extremely tiring. It's just really, really hard. They're glad they're doing it. They know it's a good thing to do. But when the day is over, man, they are dead. They are tired. But when God gives someone grace, if God calls someone to do that and gives them the grace to do it, they are empowered by God to do that work. They'll last a lot longer. They will do a better job. Along with the food or whatever it is that they're ministering to the poor with, the life of God will flow from them also. That's the whole concept of grace. That's what living in Christ is all about. When you have a congregational form of government, what you end up with are people who are not graced to lead, because God has not called them to lead. He's called them to be part of a congregation. People who are not graced to lead will lead. It's like if I have a plumbing background, okay? It would be like a plumber coming into my office and telling me how to pastor. Well, that doesn't make any more sense than me walking into an architect's office and telling them how to be an architect, or actually, for that matter, for me to walk into a plumber's office and tell him how to be a plumber. Well, that makes no sense at all, because he's trained, I'm not. He has the experience in it, I don't. Well, when it comes to leading a congregation, it's diametrically opposed to the format that God gives us to have the members of the congregation leading the congregation. He doesn't call them to it. He doesn't grace them for it. It's just not the same. And so what happens is that most congregational churches, and again, there are bound to be lots of exceptions, but generally speaking, most congregations that are led by the congregation really don't get anywhere. They are typically leading nowhere. And there's an old story about a pastor who, after a board meeting one time, when a board meeting went long, and after it, he went out to the rail yard, and he just stood there watching trains coming and going and coming and going and coming and going. And somebody walked up to him. Somebody from the church saw him and walked up and said, "Pastor, I'm just kind of curious. You've been working hard, and you just left this long board meeting, and here you are watching trains. How come you're doing that?" And he just smiled at him and said, "Well, I just needed to watch something that would move without me pushing it." And that's the difficulty with congregational people are not graced to lead, so they don't have the revelation, they don't have the vision to lead, and so typically they're not leading anywhere because there's really nowhere to go. The third problem with this is that in a format like this, the pastor becomes a hireling. The pastor, instead of being a leader, instead of being free to lead where God leads them. And if you're a little worried about the fact that I'm saying pastor here, well, is one man really supposed to lead? We're going to talk about the whole idea of there being team pastors, being a group of pastors. We'll talk about that more in our second session. But in a situation like this, the senior leader or the main leader becomes a hireling, does not have the freedom to lead where God's calling them. And in situations like this, typically you will find pastors coming and going and coming and going and coming and going. Some denominations, the typical pastor is there for 2 years and then he's gone, and then there's a year without one, and then there's another one for 2 years and he's gone. This, I believe, is a part of what's been a problem, is that they simply do not have the freedom they need to do what God's called us to do. So let's come back to me here for a second. We're talking about church government. We're talking about having a biblical format and how to really do this. And again, I want to stress, there's nothing critical intended here. We're just looking for God's best. At Living Hope, I'm really thankful. God's doing some good things. We've had some major growth. We've had some very wonderful, miraculous things going on in people's lives. And God is adding more and more people to us all the time. With growth, systems have to grow. And when systems grow, church government has to grow as well. And so that's what we're in the process of doing. And so we're just going to keep at that. So why eldership? Let's go back to our screen. Why eldership? Why is this so important? And why is it so important that we do biblical church government? Well, again, here you'll see the format that we're using. Christ as the head, elders under the authority of Christ, and then the congregation under the authority and care of the eldership. Again, Christ as the head of the church is not something that we are just trying to be all misty about, and man, I sure hope so. We so want to be able to operate and function under the leadership, under the headship of God. So let's look at some scripture, and I'll tell you what, there is a whole bunch of it, and you can just see some of these scriptures that are coming up that these all tell us how important it is to do it God's way. In Colossians chapter 1 and verse 18, we can see in the lower black box there, it says, Christ is also the head of the church, which is his body. Christ is the head of the church, which is his body. And the New Testament uses the idea of a building to describe the church, the body of Christ to be the church. And so we're going to try to bring some of these together. Let me look at some scriptures here with you to show you how important this really is to do it the Lord's way. Matthew chapter 16 and verse 18. Jesus says, "Now I say to you that you are Peter, which means rock. And upon this rock I will build my church. And the gates of hell will not prevail against it." I will build my church. Now, I know a lot of has been said about the fact that well, it's Peter, and I'm going to build my rock on Peter. Actually, the word there for Peter and church, or rock, are actually two different Greek words. One means like a little piece, little rock, which is the piece of a big rock. And I don't think that was Jesus' main emphasis in this verse. I think his main emphasis is saying, I'm going to do it. I'll build my church. You don't need to build my church. I'll build my church. You don't need to design my church. I'm doing it, and I want you to cooperate and work alongside of me according to my design. In Mark chapter 14, verse 58, this is when Jesus is being tried. He's been arrested, he's being tried, and they're bringing false witnesses to him, to make accusations against him. And this is what they say: "We heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days I will build another made without human hands." I will build another. Again, that's talking about the physical temple that was in Jerusalem. Jesus is saying that thing's going to come down. But you know what? Well, actually, the temple he's talking about directly there is his own body. He's going to be crucified, but he's going to be raised again. But that temple 70 years later or 40 years later is also going to be destroyed. And there is going to be a spiritual house. There's going to be a spiritual temple. And he's the one that's going to build it. Exodus chapter 25 and verse 40. This is Moses. He's got the Israelites out in the wilderness, and God gives him a design to build what's called the Tabernacle of Moses. It's called the Tabernacle of Meeting. And what it is, it's a great big tent area, and at the very core of that tent, at the very center of that place, is the presence of God, is the literal presence of God. And so the tabernacle, which the word means dwelling place, the tabernacle is a place where God dwells, and it's a place where man is invited to dwell. And so the ideal is it's where man and God dwell together. And in doing that, God is saying to Moses, I'm going to build this thing for you. Be sure that you make everything according to the pattern that I've shown you in the mount. Again, God's saying to Moses, don't do your own thing, man. Like don't hold a meeting and get everybody's ideas. What does everybody think this thing should look like? He says, I've got the plan. I've got the blueprint. I'm going to show it to you, and you need to build according to that. Jesus is building his church. He's got the blueprint for it, and it's important that we do it his way. In Acts chapter 7, I think it is, Stephen, he's one of the first deacons of the New Testament church, and he is about to be martyred. He's about to be stoned to death, and he's preaching to those that are about to kill him. And he's discussing the history of Israel, and he's talking about this same tabernacle of Moses. He's referring back to the hundreds of years before that when Moses had the tabernacle in the wilderness. And he says this, he says, our ancestors carried the tabernacle with them in the wilderness. It was constructed according to the plan the Lord had shown to Moses. It was constructed according to the plan. Again, the Israelites didn't build it the way they wanted it. God spoke, they heard, they built it according to his plan. And then in the book of Hebrews, it's just saying it again, they serve, it's referring back to Israel, back to natural Israel and that tabernacle. It says they serve a system of worship that is only a copy, a shadow of the real one in heaven. For when Moses was getting ready to build the tabernacle, God gave him this warning, be sure that you make everything according to the pattern that I have shown you in the mountain. You just say, Scott, basically you're saying the same thing over and over and over. And I'll tell you what, I am. I know I am. That's how important this is. God told Moses, build it according to the pattern. God said through Stephen, God told Moses, build it according to the pattern. In the book of Hebrews, he says it again. God told Moses, build it according to the pattern. When God says something 3 times, it's important. Jesus said a really important spiritual principle is that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word will be established. When God says something 3 times, it's a big deal. Build according to the pattern. Jesus said, I will build my church. And in the New Testament, he's shown us how he's going to do it. And so it's important to us. It's important to us as a New Testament church. It's important to us as Living Hope Community Church in Estevan, Saskatchewan in the year 2011, that as God continues to bless us and increase the church, that we build along with him and that we do it according to his pattern. We start setting up our own structures. We start setting up our own committees, our own government, our own format, our own ideas. We'll hinder the work of God. And that's the last thing that we want to do. We want to be able to see a beautiful house built, a beautiful family of God. We want to see a church that's going to bless the community, a church that's going to bring life to the community. There's a man by the name of Michael Fletcher who writes on church growth, and this is what he says. We don't have time to sit around in board meetings arguing about who's in charge. We have a world to change. And that's the commission that God has given us, given to you, given to Living Hope Community Church, given to his church worldwide. There's a world to change. There's a world that needs to know the love of God. And with us building according to the pattern, we will find not only will we not hinder the work of God in doing that, but we'll assist with it. We partner with him as we're doing it. Okay, so why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? Again, there are many aspects that are so important in spiritual life and so important in being a light to the community. Church government is only one, but it's an important one. We can build a church or we can let God build it. My choice is God, and I trust that yours is as well. Next time, we are going to deal with who elders are. Who elders are. We're going to start to talk about what elders do. Today we've talked about the need to be biblical. Next, we're going to deal with the fact that elder leadership really is biblical. And I hope you're still with us. I know this is a passion for some. It's a need to know for others. And if it were possible that you're still listening after you quit halfway through, I'm sure some of you quit halfway through. It's a passion of mine. I know it's a passion of the Lord's, and I invite you to pick it up in part 2 with us as well.